The first footprints were barefoot. Search teams found them frozen into the snow, nearly a kilometer away from the tent. The temperature that night had fallen below -30 degrees Celsius. Nobody survives long outside in those conditions. Not without boots, not without coats, not in the middle of the Siberian wilderness. The tent itself stood partially buried beneath snow on the eastern slope of a mountain known by local hunters as Dead Mountain. The entrance remained sealed shut, but the fabric walls had been cut open from the inside. Long knife slashes tore through the canvas as if the people trapped inside had tried to escape in complete panic. Long pause. Inside the tent were boots, heavy jackets, food, cameras, personal journals, almost everything needed for survival. Outside, 9 sets of footprints disappeared into the frozen darkness below the mountain. Long pause. Weeks later, the bodies began to appear beneath the snow. The first 2 were discovered beneath a cedar tree near the edge of the forest. Both were barefoot. Their hands were shredded and burned, as if they had tried desperately to climb the tree in the darkness. Broken branches hung several meters above them. Nearby sat the remains of a small fire, weak, temporary, already dead beneath the snow. The next bodies were found between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent. One appeared to have been crawling uphill before collapsing into the frozen slope. Another lay face down in the snow. Months later, when spring thaw finally melted the ravine below the mountain, the remaining bodies were discovered beneath deep layers of ice and snow. Their injuries shocked investigators. Broken ribs, massive internal trauma, severe skull fractures. One woman was missing her tongue. Long pause. No signs of another group were ever confirmed. No avalanche debris surrounded the campsite. No evidence clearly explained why 9 experienced hikers would suddenly flee half-naked into a deadly blizzard in the middle of the night. The Soviet investigation closed the case with a single sentence: an unknown compelling force. Long pause. Weeks before the mountain became a graveyard, the expedition began inside crowded Soviet train stations, hundreds of kilometers to the south. Young engineering students laughed beside piles of skis and heavy backpacks. Steam drifted through the freezing air as trains carried them north through the Soviet winter. Smiling faces, snow-covered jackets, cigarettes hanging from exhausted mouths after overnight travel. Nothing in those photographs suggested fear. Nothing suggested disaster. The leader of the expedition was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. Quiet, disciplined, methodical. Friends described him as calm under pressure and deeply respected by everyone around him. The others trusted him completely. Most members of the group were students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Several had already completed dangerous winter expeditions across remote Soviet terrain. This journey was intended to qualify them for the highest category of Soviet expedition certification. The route would stretch hundreds of kilometers across isolated mountain wilderness, rarely crossed during winter. Among the group was Lyudmila Dubinina, fearless, shark-tongued, energetic. Years earlier, she had survived a gunshot wound during another expedition, after being accidentally struck by a hunter. Even after severe blood loss, she reportedly insisted on walking part of the return journey herself. Yuri Doroshenko was known for his physical strength and reckless confidence. Rustam Slobodin pushed himself harder than anyone else during difficult hikes. Zina Kolmogorova carried an optimism that often kept morale alive during brutal conditions. Then there was Semyon Zolotaryov, older than the others by more than a decade, a decorated World War II veteran, mysterious even to the rest of the expedition itself. Several hikers barely knew him before departure. Together, the group looked less like future victims and more like young people standing at the beginning of their lives. The deeper north they traveled, the emptier the world became. Roads disappeared beneath snow, villages became smaller and farther apart, forests swallowed the horizon. Eventually, the expedition reached Vihai, one of the last inhabited settlements before the wilderness began. Beyond that point stretched hundreds of kilometers of frozen mountains and forest. Local hunters warned them about worsening weather conditions farther north. Winter storms had become increasingly violent. Visibility could disappear within seconds. Temperatures could kill exposed skin in minutes. The hikers continued anyway. For them, difficulty was the purpose of the expedition. Not long after entering the wilderness, one member of the group began suffering severe joint pain. Yuri Yudin could no longer continue. Weak and exhausted, he turned back before the expedition reached the mountain region. The others hugged him goodbye beside the snowy trail before disappearing deeper into the forest. It was the last time anyone outside the expedition would ever see them alive. Years later, Yudin often spoke about the guilt of surviving. Not because he escaped intentionally, but because his body failed before the mountain did. By late January, the expedition entered the northern Ural Mountains. The landscape felt endless. White snow stretched beneath a gray sky without movement or color. Wind moved constantly across the slopes, erasing tracks almost as quickly as they appeared. The mountain itself carried a grim name in the local Mansi language, Kolotsiakol, Dead Mountain. At first, conditions remained manageable. The group skied across frozen rivers and dense forests while documenting the journey through photographs and journals. One entry joked about frozen bread becoming hard enough to break teeth. Another described exhaustion after crossing deep snowdrifts for hours against violent headwinds. Still, morale appeared strong. The hikers sang songs at night inside their tents, shared jokes, took photographs of each other smiling in blinding snowstorms. Nothing in the journals suggested fear. Nothing suggested panic. Long pause, then the weather began to change. Strong winds swept across the slopes with increasing force. Visibility collapsed repeatedly beneath blowing snow. Navigation became difficult. At some point during the final stages of the journey, the expedition drifted west of its planned route. Instead of crossing safely through lower forest terrain, the group moved onto the exposed eastern slope of Dead Mountain itself. The decision would later confuse investigators for decades. Experienced hikers normally avoided sleeping on exposed slopes during severe winter storms. The forest below offered protection from the wind. But for reasons nobody fully understands, the group remained on the mountain. Long pause. On February 1st, 1959, the hikers established camp directly on the exposed mountainside. As darkness approached, wind speeds intensified. Snow moved horizontally across the slope. Temperatures continued falling lower. Inside the tent, the hikers ate dinner and prepared for the night. One of the final photographs recovered from the expedition showed blurred movement beneath darkness and snow. The image looked chaotic, almost panicked. Sometime during the night, something happened inside that tent. Investigators later confirmed that the hikers escaped by cutting through the side of the canvas from within. Many left without boots, without heavy coats, without proper winter equipment. This detail terrified investigators from the beginning. Experienced survivalists do not willingly abandon shelter during a Siberian blizzard, unless they believe remaining inside is even more dangerous. The footprints showed signs of controlled movement at first. Not sprinting, not complete chaos. But farther down the slope, the group separated. Some moved toward the cedar tree near the forest edge. Others attempted to return uphill toward the tent. None succeeded. Long pause. Investigators later concluded that at least some members of the expedition survived for several hours after leaving the tent. They tried to make fire. They removed clothing from the dead to stay warm. Some attempted to climb trees for visibility. Others tried desperately to reach the campsite again. The mountain killed all of them before dawn. Long pause. Over the decades, countless theories attempted to explain the mystery. Avalanche, military testing, secret Soviet weapons experiments, infrasound generated by violent wind patterns, psychological panic triggered by environmental conditions. Yet none of the theories fully explain every detail. The avalanche theory remains the most widely accepted explanation today. Supporters believe unstable snow conditions may have partially collapsed onto the tent during the night. The hikers, fearing a larger avalanche, escaped downslope in panic. But critics point to missing evidence. No massive avalanche debris surrounded the campsite. The tent itself remained partially standing. The footprints remained visible for long distances. Other theories focused on possible military activity. During the Cold War, classified Soviet weapons testing occurred throughout remote regions of the country. Some witnesses reported strange orange lights in the sky around the same period. Radiation traces discovered on some clothing only deepened suspicion. Still, no final explanation has ever satisfied everyone. Long pause. Today, the mountain remains exactly where it has always been, silent beneath endless snow. The tent is gone. The footprints disappeared decades ago. Most of the investigators are dead, but the mystery survived all of them. Long pause. Somewhere on that frozen slope, 9 young hikers stepped out into the darkness believing they would return within minutes. None of them did. No final theory has ever explained every detail. Not the footprints, not the injuries, not the panic that drove experienced survivalists into a Siberian blizzard half-dressed in the middle of the night. Maybe the mountain keeps the answer buried beneath the snow, or maybe the truth disappeared with the storm itself. More than 60 years later, the wind still crosses Dead Mountain the same way it did that night. Cold, endless, silent. And somewhere beneath that silence, the final moments of the Dyatlov Pass expedition remain frozen in the dark forever.